The following is a presentation of the Belly Up Sports Media Network.
And what is going on, everybody? Another week, another dollar, as we are here previewing week 4 and also recapping week number 3. We had some of our SEC teams get into conference play, and we will have more this week. And week 4 is absolutely loaded. This is looking like an early statement Saturday, as we have big games inside the conference and also outside of the conference too. A lot of playoff implications, a lot of division, and also we could definitely find out who is going to be for real in the SEC moving forward. But with that, we are back here for week number 4 in SEC Talk. It's hard to believe. So how are you, Wade? How was your weekend?
I'm good. It definitely was another good weekend of college football. This was the first weekend where I was able to just sit on the couch and really take it all in. I watched the LSU game, of course, to start the day. The ending of the Missouri game against Kansas State was a classic, and then watched the Gamecocks hang in there and make it competitive for a half, and then ultimately Georgia Bulldogs came to play.
Yeah, we'll get into that game. We have Neil chiming in here, coming in with a hot question here. LSU can definitely still win the West. I definitely agree with that. We'll get to that once we get into LSU's contest against Mississippi State this past weekend. But let's do how we always start here on SEC Talk. Let's get into the AP poll. This was released earlier today around 1 o'clock. And we have a new addition to the poll. So there's a little bit of changes, not too many at the top outside the conference. You know, we saw Texas move up after their victory against Wyoming. But outside of that, let's hop into how the SEC is shaping up to be. Number 1 is Georgia, still at the top of the polls after their victory against South Carolina. They were tested, but they were able to pass that test this past week. Alabama falls for number 10 and number 3 after kind of an embarrassing performance out there in South Florida. Only a 2-touchdown victory against the Bulls out there in Tampa, but Alabama's still in number 13. LSU, they went up 2 spots after their cruising victory over Mississippi State this past week in Stark Vegas. And number 15 is Ole Miss. Ole Miss is a team that just continues to creep up. Not many people are going to be talking about them. Maybe more will be talking about them if Ole Miss can knock off the Tide this week in T-Town. We'll get to that matchup later on in the show. And our followers here of the SEC is number 23, Tennessee. They fell all the way from number 11 to number 23. So a big tumble after Tennessee fell to Florida once again in the swamp. It just feels like that's a place that Tennessee can't really get a win in. And then speaking of the Gators, they are here in the poll at number 25. Definitely not surprising. They earned it. You know, they have that one loss to a really good Utah team. Utah is definitely going to be a competitor there in the Pac-12. So any surprises that you see here with the 6 teams being here?
Well, I think you touched on it with Ole Miss. I mean, I think that you could argue they could be ranked ahead of number 12 LSU and number 13 Alabama. That will shake out in the next 2 weeks. They play the Tide and the Tigers back-to-back weekends, so really no complaints there. I think that you could see those teams shift around. Now, Tennessee and Florida, I don't understand how you can't have Tennessee at number 25 and Florida at number 23. We just saw them win by 20-plus points on Saturday. Tennessee doesn't really have a signature win on the year. Florida does now that they beat Tennessee, and their loss was a competitive game on the road in week 1. So I'd like to see the Gators get rewarded a little bit, but ultimately there's a lot of football left to be played. So I think we'll see some variation of these teams and maybe a few others, slide in there.
I agree with you, but these polls never respect about the head-to-head. The college football playoff poll has done that too. But nonetheless, I agree with you. There's still a lot of football to be played, and it'll definitely play out as the weeks go on. So we're going to continue on with the second portion of our show. Before we get to our favorite segment, SEC Fantasy, just for a quick reminder, as we always do here on the show, if you have any questions, we already had one popping in, so don't feel shy. If you want to leave a comment on your favorite team, how your favorite team fared, if you're an SEC East or an SEC West fan. So definitely leave your comments, and we'll get to that throughout the show here. All right, let's get into that SEC fantasy segment. You got fantasy football rolling on with all the Sunday matchups in the NFL. Hope your teams are doing well. And let's get into SEC fantasy, which is presented by our friends over at Mahler Bros Golf. If you want to get 15% off at Mahler Bros Golf apparel and gear, you can use code BELLYUP. That's 15% off at mahlerbros.com with code BELLYUP. That's once again all uppercase. All right, let's get into the rules of SEC Fantasy before we get into how the teams fared out. So SEC Fantasy rules, you get one quarterback, one running back, one wide receiver, one defense, and you cannot use a player you picked. I think in the next coming weeks, we'll update this, maybe add a little bit of a bonuses here. So we'll definitely experiment as the season goes on. But let's get into how our teams did in week number 3. Let's start off with your team, and we will see if you can bounce back with a victory.
Yeah, so this was a good week for me. As expected, Connor Weigman had a nice day for Texas A&M against UL Monroe. That game got delayed by some weather, but ultimately it dried up and Connor was able to really sling it. I think that Texas A&M is going to be more of a pass-heavy offense going forward. Nobody has really stepped up at running back to fill in for Devin Achane. So Weigman, we might see him a couple times this year on the segment. At running back, Ray Davis, this is a guy that we've been watching closely. As many of y'all know, he did transfer in the conference from Vanderbilt to Kentucky. And Kentucky running backs are a staple on this show. They tend to do quite well. So he had 72 yards in a tune-up game against Akron. And then Brian Thomas Jr., a good day, but I picked the wrong Tigers wide receiver. Brian Thomas had 60 yards. That's because Malik Neighbors took about all the other available yardage, adding over 200 yards receiving. So I think we knew the Tigers were going to spread it down the field and really open up the passing game. It was Malik Neighbors that was on the big-time receiving end of that. Brian Thomas was good in a complimentary role with 60 yards. He looks to still be a big part of this Tiger offense. And then the Tiger defense for Auburn, they had a tremendous day, letting up just 218 yards. So that's a good day here as we inch into SEC play. 251 total yards. I'll take that any day.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be hard to beat. We'll see if my team came to play and can beat that mark of 251. And we're going to start off with the quarterback and KJ Jefferson. Definitely was a tough loss for Arkansas. Actually, yesterday the game happened. 247 yards, about what I expected of KJ Jefferson. The offense was able to score 31 points, but the defense just didn't have any answers for what the Cougars were throwing at them. And like you, I picked the wrong Florida running back. I should have just went with Trevor Etienne. He had over 170 yards rushing. Montreal Johnson, he did have 2 scores, but it was both receiving. So that's where the bonus is here, which I really wanted to. But in the rushing department, only 23 rushing yards. Etienne would have been the play. Brock Bowers, not the game that I really expected him to have, 54 yards against South Carolina. And then Texas A&M defense only holding ULM to 3 points, but still allowing 222 yards. So that's going to cut into my score here a bit. So 102, I'll take that. Over 100 is still pretty good, especially with SEC players. And I really didn't even pick anybody going up against an FCS opponent. So a 251 to 102 is the score. Wade is now going to have the first pick of SEC draft going into week number 4. He didn't go with the quarterback. He went with a defense, but we are going to go with the signal callers. And you're going to go with Jackson Dart going against the Crimson Tide defense.
Yeah, we're in week 4, so it's time to get some real matchups here. And Jackson Dart, he's got to be the guy if they want to beat Alabama, and I think he will. I mean, I think that this game has a little bit of shootout potential. I know we haven't seen the Alabama offense show up, but we sure have seen Ole Miss's offense show up. And I think that they're going to have to make some plays through the air, much like Texas did, if they want to defeat Alabama, because Alabama's still tough up front. It's going to be hard to run the ball on them. But I think Dart kind of brings an element where he can throw it on the run, and I think he can rack up over 250 yards passing against the Crimson Tide.
Yeah, if Ole Miss wants to pull off the quote-unquote upset, but I don't think that many people would call it an upset. Yeah, Jackson Dart definitely has to have a very good game. And first time of SEC fantasy season, we see JD5 make an appearance coming off an insane game against Mississippi State. The completion percentage, which through the roof, 86.5% for Jaden Daniels. I look for him to do the same. I mean, Arkansas's defense really has some troubles with BYU's offense. You know, this matchup is always tough. LSU versus Arkansas. It's a rivalry game. It's for playing for a trophy. But I think that Jaden Daniels will definitely come to play this offense after Florida State is woken up. You know, they scored 72 against Grambling like they should, but they put up 41 against a very solid Mississippi State defense. I expect Daniels to have not really the insane stats that he had last game, but I think it's going to be a good enough game for the Tigers to keep on scoring against Arkansas defense that's struggling. So let's go on now to the running back group. You're going to have a new face here for SEC Fantasy. The first time that we've seen Jaquavius Marks of Mississippi State. He's really been the main star for Mississippi State offense that has really relied on the running game. So talk about Marks' matchup against South Carolina this week.
Yeah, I definitely didn't think we would feature a Mississippi State running back on this show anytime soon, but the Bulldogs have kind of committed more to the run. Will Rogers has kind of struggled to adjust to the pro-style offense that they're instilling there in Starkville. So I think they'll rely on Marks here on the road going into Columbia, South Carolina. That's going to be a tough road environment. I don't know if they're going to be able to get their signals in to pass the ball. So I think they're going to try to do what Georgia did, and that's just run the ball and throw up the middle. So I look for Marks to have a good day on the ground.
Yeah, it's definitely a great pick. I think that if Mississippi State wants to win this game, they have to get back to their running game. And we see Ray Davis. He gets a spotlight in back-to-back weeks. You picked him last week, but I'm picking him for one reason only. Guess who they're playing? Yes, they're playing the Vanderbilt Commodores. He's going to be looking for some revenge. And the way that Vandy's have been looking, all my hope for this season is just out the door for this Vanderbilt team. Ray Davis, he's really been a star. He had 70 yards rushing in their 35-3 win over Akron. I expect that to happen once again. I think that Devin Leary is going to get his fair share, but I think that Ray Davis is due for another good back-to-back weeks here for the Kentucky offense. So I expect Kentucky to roll over Vanderbilt in this matchup. All right, let's get into the pass catchers. We missed out on some notable pass catchers last week. Like you mentioned, Malik Neighbors tore up Mississippi State, but another name that tore it up against Kansas State was Luther Burden III. Talk about him going up against Memphis.
Yeah, this is a guy that I just had to get in my lineup after watching him on Saturday. I mean, other than Malik Neighbors, this guy was the most impressive player in the SEC this weekend. Luther Burden was a 5-star recruit that chose the home state team, Missouri, and I think that they're now just revolving their entire offense around him. His yardage has gone up each week, starting at 90, so that's a really good starting point. Then he eclipsed 100, and then this past week he had over 120. So he's going to continue to get involved. I think this Memphis game this weekend could become a shootout, and I think that he'll be very involved again, and I think he's just a budding star in the league.
Yeah, very very great pick there. I think that Burton is definitely a superstar here in the league. I'm going to go with Jordan Watkins. I think that, like I mentioned, if Ole Miss wants to win this game against Alabama, they're going to have to air it out. That's the same thing that Texas did. Quinn Ewers had over 300 yards passing. I think that Dart's going to have to do the same. So I think that Jordan Watkins, you don't know which wide receiver for Ole Miss is going to have the big day. So I'm just going to go with a guy who's really been consistent. He's a senior coming off a really good game against Georgia Tech where he had 4 catches and 119 yards and a touchdown. So I think that he continues this momentum going against Alabama's defense on Saturday afternoon. All right, let's go on to the defenses. And the defenses are always key here on SC Fantasy. They can either make or break your scores. So you're going to go with the Georgia defense going up against Trent Dilfer's squad and UAB.
Yeah, I think UAB is a good story, but ultimately this is the Georgia defense. So while we get one more cupcake with them, let's use it. But from here on out, we're going to have to select these defenses a little bit more carefully. We both dipped out of conference this week, but coming forward, I mean, yeah, this is kind of what makes or breaks your score is how much yards your defense lets up.
Yeah, I took the same mindset before everybody's in conference play. I wanted to get one more cupcake in Florida going up against Charlotte. Charlotte has one of the worst defenses in the FBS. I don't think that their offense is going to do really good. I think that Florida's defense, they are the most improved unit from last year to this year. Their defensive coordinator has done a very good job revamping this Florida defense, and that defensive front is just nasty. They have a guy that's over 430 pounds, and he was getting after people on Saturday night. So I think that the Gators defense, along with Georgia's defense, is probably the two best defenses to pick, especially with other teams being in conference play. All right, we'll get to our SEC fantasy results next week. We'll keep tabs of how our team did. But now let's go on now to our SEC Week 3 recap, which is presented by SeatGeek. If you want to get tickets to concerts, musicals, or sporting events, you can head on over to SeatGeek and use code BellyUpSports. That's once again all uppercase to receive $20 off of your first purchase. That's SeatGeek, BellyUpSports, $20 off your first purchase. All right, let's get into our SEC Week 3 recap. And let's go ahead and start with an absolute statement by the Purple and Gold. LSU traveled to start Vegas in front of 60,000 fans, ringing their cowbells for 3 hours. But by the time that the third quarter is rolling around, the stands were looking quite empty as this one was getting out of hand. LSU wins this one 41-14 against Mississippi State. Mississippi State's offense is definitely concerning forward. They just weren't able to run the ball. Will Rogers just really looks out of sort, going from that air raid offense that we saw with Mike Leach to now really have an emphasis of running the ball with Zach Arnett's new styled offense. I just don't think it's really a system that Will Rogers is built for. It's definitely going to be concerning moving forward because especially with road trip with South Carolina, and then you have Alabama coming to your place. But on the other side, LSU's offense looked really good from the get-go. Jaden Daniels, probably one of his best games that we saw him in a Tiger uniform. And like you mentioned, Malik Neighbors having an historic first half, over 190 yards receiving. Don't really see that much. And he was able to get 239 through the air. But LSU's defense, I think that everyone wants to talk about that, but I think that LSU's defense really had a bounce-back game. We all want to talk about that Florida State loss. I can't really look at Grambling, but I think that LSU's defense, especially without Greg Brooks and also Amara Spates being out in this one. So what are your thoughts? I'm sure there's a lot of positives from the Tigers in this matchup.
Yeah, I mean, not a lot went wrong for this team. The offense looked incredibly efficient. Chet brought up a good point in our group chat. I think without Mason Taylor at tight end, Jaden Daniels was really challenged to stretch the field, and the guy's got the talent to do it. He just sometimes isn't confident enough to do so. So it was good to see him, really try to hit some deep shots and get Malik Neighbors involved for a little bit. I mean, it didn't look like Neighbors was even our wide receiver number one, but he alleviated any concerns there this weekend. Really looks to be a nice NFL prospect as well. He's very fast and can run almost any route. And then I think the carousel of running backs has been working. I think we'll see one emerge eventually. I do think that guy will be Logan Diggs, but everybody kind of complements each other well. And then defensively, without the leader, Greg Brooks out there, they didn't really skip a beat. We finally saw Mason Smith get involved. Mekhi Wingo had a good game as well. And some young linebackers checking in as well. Harold Perkins all over the field. And I think who started for Spates? Whit Weeks.
Yep, it was Whit Weeks.
Yeah, he looked pretty good as a freshman. So yeah, I was really impressed with how the Tigers played. I was a little apprehensive playing the early game for the first SEC game. But I think that Brian Kelly had the team ready and kind of changes my mindset for what's to come. I mean, you got Arkansas and then another tough road game against Ole Miss, but I feel much more confident going into those two games.
Yeah, very impressive showing by LSU. The Tigers will return home to face Arkansas. Mississippi State will travel to Columbia to face the Gamecocks. So let's go on now to the next 11 a.m. game showdown here in the SEC. That was another Big 12 versus SEC. And finally, somebody from the SEC won an out-of-conference game, and it took Missouri to do it. And this was an instant classic. If you were not watching this one, then you definitely missed out on a wild ending. But this was a back-and-forth battle. Missouri's offense really came to play. And I think that those first two games, we were talking about the offensive struggles, especially last week against Middle Tennessee State. But this offense showed up, especially Luther Burden the third. He absolutely balled out. We saw Brady Cook look like the Brady Cook that we saw of him last season with Missouri. But Missouri's defense, I think, really stood up to the challenge. This was a Kansas State team that was a lot of veterans. Will Howard coming back. I know that they lost Deuce Vaughn on the offensive side and Julius Brents on the defensive back that they lost to the NFL draft. But this is a Missouri team that definitely was tested in this one. Like I mentioned, this was a back-and-forth battle. Come down to the last possession. Missouri gets the ball with under a minute left. And here comes the hero, Harrison Mevis, 61 yards, and it is good through the uprights, and Missouri fans storm the field. And what a victory this was. Missouri now 3-0. Kansas State drops to 2-1 and out of the rankings after the loss. So very impressive win for Missouri. Does this change anything if Missouri not really can win the SEC East, but can they be contender in the SEC East?
I think you can throw them in the middle of the pack. I mean, you can't tell me this team wouldn't be competitive against Kentucky or South Carolina. I think they'll beat Vanderbilt, obviously, but even the way Tennessee played this weekend, I mean, I think that there's a huge logjam of good teams that will make bowl games, but they're not great. Missouri, South Carolina, Florida, Tennessee, I mean, they're all right there. So Kentucky. So it'll be interesting to see how the East plays out. I think Georgia will definitely emerge at the top, but you could be looking at 5 or 6 bowl quality teams in the SEC East. And Missouri, if they wanted to get there, they needed to win one out of conference. And I don't think it's fair to drop Kansas State from the rankings. I think this is a team that we'll see climb back in the top 25. I mean, a guy made a 61-yard field goal in the rain. If that thing doinks off the upright or gets blocked, I mean, I think Kansas State would rise in the rankings for a tough road win. So to drop them 10 or 11 spots out of the polls just seems like an overreaction.
Yeah, it definitely does seem like overreaction. But Missouri will return home this weekend against a Memphis team. Like I always say, after a big win, there's always a letdown spot. We'll see if Missouri is in that alert.
That's some good foreshadowing for what's to come.
What's to come? We'll see if any of us will pull the trigger on Missouri getting upset. We'll definitely keep that in mind. All right, let's get into the 2:30 CBS. We're winding down of our CBS on SEC games. And what
I thought it was over this year.
South Carolina at number 1 Georgia, and this was pretty much Georgia's first test, and they definitely got tested. South Carolina punched them in the mouth. They're up 14-3. Spencer Rattler was looking good. Xavier Leggett, the wide receiver, made some quality catches, especially with Antoine Wells going down with injury. South Carolina's defense was able to create some pressure against Carson Beck, but as always, South Carolina does in the second half. They always fall down and crumble. And Georgia looked like the team that they thought they were going to be. 21 unanswered points. Carson Beck and that offense was able to get the job rolling. And Georgia was out one of their star receivers and still able to put up 24. So I know, we all want to talk about South Carolina and their hot start and ultimately blowing this. But were you impressed or unimpressed with Georgia's performance on Saturday afternoon?
Kind of lukewarm. I think this team's got more holes than we expected. I don't know if Carson Beck is going to be the it factor at quarterback that you need to win a national championship. I think that Stetson Bennett wasn't the most talented quarterback in the world, but I do think he had a little bit more of the charisma and the it factor to make, confident plays when the game's on the line. I don't know if I've seen that from Beck yet, but Georgia didn't panic and they did score 21 unanswered points, like you mentioned. So I think this Georgia team is still for real. There's a lot of lessons to be learned from this one and still a victory. So that's always a good sign when you can win when you're not at your best. But for South Carolina, I can't help to think that if Juice Wells was healthy, I think this could be a whole different game because Xavier Leggett was great. He's kind of a go up and get it guy, but South Carolina had so much luck on that first drive, on that first score with Juice Wells cutting across the middle. And I just would have liked to seen that transpire down the stretch for the Gamecocks, but ultimately a good effort. And for Georgia, they escape with the victory. And I don't know who's going to challenge them on this regular season stretch. It sets up pretty nicely for the Bulldogs.
Not many. I thought that Tennessee, but the way that Tennessee looked in the swamp, I'm just not sure anymore. But I don't think that any of us had South Carolina being 1-2 at this point. So we'll see the Gamecocks can turn it around. They're going to be hosting Mississippi State, while Georgia going back to the non-conference schedule and facing UAB between the hedges on Saturday night. All right, let's get into the next one. And boy, this was a stinker of a game between number 10 Alabama
Everything about it.
at South Florida. We talked about the weird trip of Alabama going to a program like South Florida. Don't still understand. I think that the main thing was for recruiting, but yeesh, this was an awful showing. And in front of the recruits out there in Tampa, they're wondering, like,
might be
I don't
wanting
know
to
if
go
we
to
should go
Gainesville.
them. I don't know if we should go to them. I mean, look at the way that Florida looked. But we're going to get to Neil's statement in a sec. I saw his about Alabama, but Alabama 17-3. Yes, that's 17-3. That you're not reading that wrong. This was about as ugly as the weather was during this game. They had a brief lightning and rain delay. The cameras of ESPN looked like you were watching a high school football game at some point, but it was 3-3 at one point going into the half. It was just a quarterback carousel of Alabama. Tyler Buckner of Notre Dame was named the starter, and then it didn't work out. Tyler Buckner he had an awful performance. Let's just be honest with that. It wasn't very good. So Nick Saban was just like, screw it. Let's just put in the freshman, give him some reps, and Ty Simpson. He looked, good at times. He had that one long pass to the tight end in the open flat. But I was very surprised that at one point that Nick Saban didn't really go to Jalen Milroe at all. I mean, it's not like Milroe sucked against Texas. He was very good at times.
Competitive.
So it's just a quarterback carousel that I don't think that anyone's going to figure out who's going to be the quarterback signal caller. Who knows? But only putting up 17 points against the same South Florida team that only won one game last year is pretty pathetic. And I'm going to go ahead and give Neil the question to you. Is Bama as bad as they looked on Saturday?
I didn't believe it until this weekend, Neil, but I think you're right. I mean, like you said, South Florida let up like 40 points to Western Kentucky to start the year. This team's not that good. This shouldn't have been a trap game. I get that the weather plays a factor, but Alabama should still be able to move the ball on almost every drive. And yeah, maybe you don't score 50 points because of the rain, but for Alabama to not even get 20, I mean, they should have scored at least 35. So, yeah, I think that Alabama is still going to be a competitive team. I think that you don't write them off as an easy win when they come to town. They still hold some weight, but I don't think you can tell me this team deserves to be anywhere ahead of LSU or Ole Miss. And I'm interested to see what Ole Miss can do.
Yeah, I mean, Neil says they get 3 more losses at minimum. We'll definitely see. They definitely get tested this week against Ole Miss with their high-powered offense. I mean, the offensive line couldn't even hold up against South Florida's defensive line, and that should definitely concern you. We're just not so used. We're used to Alabama bullying people, especially a team like South Florida. They're able to do it against Middle Tennessee. But this is back-to-back weeks where they just don't look very good. They're just not really that leader that we saw last year's team with Will Anderson and Bryce Young. There's really no leaderless. Like Nick Saban, you don't really see that fire on the sidelines in back-to-back weeks. So I'm not saying the Alabama dynasty it's over, but it's starting to tick down, especially with other teams passing them up. And with NIL, it's definitely a big concern for Alabama. So we'll see if the Crimson Tide can do anything, but there's definitely a glaring issue there at the quarterback position. I just don't know how this team's going to get it fixed. All right, let's go on now to another SEC West team in action. That is the Texas A&M Aggies. And boy, Texas A&M's offense looks absolutely insane in the past couple of weeks. I know that they gave up 48 points to Miami, but even with the loss, they still scored 33. So I think that they finally found their quarterback after a couple of years going away from Max Johnson and Haynes King. I think they found their guy of the future. Connor Weigman is definitely a stud. I know it's against ULM. Don't get me wrong. I think it's still a great performance. So I think that this Texas A&M offense, we saw Anaya Smith have a really good game, get over 100 yards receptions, and this Texas A&M defense continue to roll. So not really going to talk about it too much, but I'm definitely impressed with Texas A&M. I think that they're looking like one of the better teams in the SEC West, along with LSU and Ole Miss so far. All right, let's get into the game that is definitely going to be worth talking about, and this is our annual rivalry game number 11, Tennessee going to the Swamp in Florida. And I told you so. I knew that something was going to be special.
And I didn't believe it.
I should have just picked Florida straight up. I wish I would have, but I think that Florida definitely impressed with them, especially in the first half. It was 26-7 in the flash. Tennessee went down the field, got up 7-0, and then Florida was like, all right, this is not going to happen again. We're not letting this going on. So they went up 26-7. Graham Mertz looked pretty good, definitely better overall than his week 1 performance on the road against Utah. But Tennessee, Joe Milton, I just think that he is definitely one of the most overhyped quarterbacks in college football. I get that he has all the arm and stuff, but some of the decision-making was just off. That one where he was getting sacked, he was like, screw it. I'm just going to throw it up pretty much like a punt. And Florida picks it off and gets into the touchdown territory. So very impressed with Florida. I think that this was definitely a huge win for Billy Napier. I think that his seat was starting to get hotter. This win definitely buys him some time in Gainesville, but you can't just do this once in one season. You got to be able to do it again. They still have some tests, obviously with Georgia, Florida game coming up in October, but definitely impressive win. I think that this Florida defense is definitely prepared in the SEC. Their defense is going to keep them in every ball game. So I think with the offense, especially if Trevor Etienne can play like he did Saturday night, Florida is definitely going to be a tough out every Saturday. So what are your thoughts of this matchup? I definitely know that you were expecting more for Tennessee, but Florida really impressed us on Saturday.
Yeah, this one did puzzle me because I think I was pretty high on Tennessee, and I just didn't think Florida had enough of an offensive identity. And I didn't think I really knew enough about the defense. The defense did look good against Utah in that loss. And then they played McNeese State. So there was really nothing you could take from that. But, offensively, I think Florida found their groove. Run the ball with the 2 running backs. Etienne can kind of be the first and second down back. And then you bring in Marshawn Johnson in short yardage situations and to throw blocks. So I think they got a good groove offensively, and defensively, this team really impressed me. Joe Milton, not so much. I think he kind of disappointed me in this game. I think that I expected him to be able to step up on a road environment and make the plays, but this was probably in reality his first road start other than a game against Vanderbilt last year. So maybe there needs to be a little bit of growing time there for the senior. But for Florida, I think they've staked their claim as the number 2 team behind Georgia. And of course, we always look forward to that game in Jacksonville. So maybe a little bit more on the line this year than others.
Yeah, definitely going to be a treat, especially if Florida can keep winning. But Florida continues to dominate this series, especially in the Swamp. It's been over 20 years since Tennessee, and they're going to have to wait 2 more years for their next road test back at the Swamp. So the Gators get a huge win in Saturday night in front of a sold-out crowd in the prime time, too. So let's get on to the next one. This was FCS versus SEC. Auburn just continues to find ways to win. They are quietly undefeated. I feel like no one's talking about this Auburn team, but got a very good win. They did struggle in the early half. This was a 0-0 game in the second quarter, and then Auburn's offense and Peyton Thorne was able to get it going. So 45-13. We'll talk more about Auburn next week and then into this week when they face Texas A&M. So Auburn looking very good throughout the first couple of weeks. They were able to get the road test against Cal. They were able to pass that, and then they were able to get cruising to a win here against Samford. All right, let's get into the next one that I'm sure that you're going to be wanting to talk about because you picked it right. UNLV, the Running Rebels, they did it. 40-37 against Vanderbilt. I just lost all hope for Vanderbilt that I had this season. They have just been looking awful the first 4 weeks of the season. I know, the Wake Forest game, I was like, okay, Wake Forest is good. And then Wake Forest goes on the road to Old Dominion. They struggled. They ended up coming out with victory. But I did bring up off air that UNLV did win this same game and matchup in 2019, 30-14. I was a little bit worrisome, but I thought that Vanderbilt was going to pull away. It did not happen. This was absolutely really no defenses in this matchup. Both offenses were able to do their own thing. But UNLV got the game-winning field goal as time expired, as Vanderbilt just continues to be in the dumps of the SEC East. So I'm just going to let you have the floor because you picked it. So UNLV wins this one against Vandy.
Yeah, I didn't watch this one, but I did tune in throughout the game to just check on the score. I just had a hunch that Vanderbilt wouldn't be able to travel to Vegas and come away on top. I mean, I don't have any trust in this team either. I don't know what their direction is. I think that maybe the direction for Vanderbilt is to sit back and enjoy that check coming in from the ESPN deal each year and trying to win in baseball, because I think that's about all they do. But in this NIL era, I think Vanderbilt's got to kind of decide what they want to do. If they want to be competitive in football, they need to start buying into their team, get some facility upgrades, maybe even strike some NIL deals. I mean, they have a pretty rich backing. That's hard to do for football, though. You need a lot of athletes to be competitive. I think they're going to find more success in basketball and baseball, where the rosters are a little smaller, because it just shows how far this team has to come if they can't even beat UNLV, who's not a good team in their own right. So Vanderbilt's not even like, I don't even see how you can put them within 14 points of an SEC team this year. That's how bad it is.
Yeah, we'll see if they can bounce back. It's not going to be easy. They got Kentucky this coming week. So I don't know. Maybe they'll surprise us. Maybe they'll not. So we'll definitely keep an eye out on this Vandy team, but it's not looking very good. I just have like hope going into the season. I thought this was going to be a team coming off of a 5-win season. I thought they would get one more in 6, but they would get lucky of even getting 4 at this rate. So hate to keep bashing on Vanderbilt. I feel like we do it every year, but my gosh,
we try to be positive.
UNLV, that is embarrassing. I mean, that is just flat out embarrassing. UNLV won't even be close to the Mountain West at the top. It's probably going to be, Boise and Fresno and Air Force, maybe Colorado State, the way they look. But UNLV is going to be the middle of the road. They're not even good. Look at their defense. They are not good. So, yeah, a lot of concerns with Vanderbilt. So we'll get to them whenever we get to the picks. So we'll talk more about Vandy. But for now, they need the cone of shame this week for losing to UNLV this week. All right, let's go on to Georgia Tech and Ole Miss, an SEC ACC battle. And
the SEC got one.
The SEC got one too. It was a great week for the SEC, kind of. We had some teams that were really laying an egg, but Ole Miss, this was a close game, a close battle in the first half going into the half. This was like a 13-7 game going into the half. Was getting concerned with Ole Miss, but Haynes King and Georgia Tech was no match against the Rebels. They scored 48-23 was the final score. So Ole Miss really just taking care of business. Even with the slow start, they were still able to score 40 points. So this offense was able to continue to roll. Jackson Dart had himself a game, and then Jordan Watkins had over 100 yards as well. So Ole Miss's defense, though, coming off of a huge win against Tulane, they struggled in the second half, giving up 23 against Georgia Tech. But nonetheless, I think that you and I know that Ole Miss, their really main challenge, and we're going to learn a lot about this Ole Miss team when they go to T-Town this coming week.
Yeah, and I think that Ole Miss has done everything they can to this point. I think that they have a good road win against Tulane. I think the offense is always clicking. Took them a little bit in this one to get going, but when it did, they were no match for Georgia Tech's defense. So, yeah, I think Ole Miss, a lot of positives here. Very good run, pass balance. I think they have some of the better quarterback play in the conference. And, hey, I think this defense might have finally turned the corner. So, they have the makings of a pretty complete team. I don't know that any SEC team right now has shown a complete team, so I think they're right in the middle of everybody.
No, I agree. I'll give them the pass for the slow start. I mean, if you watch Saturday's game, the top teams, Florida State was off to a rough start against Boston College. Texas got off to a slow start. So it was just a slow start Saturday. So I'll give them the pass. They still put up 48 and won this game by 25 points. So very good win out of conference for the Rebels. So all right, let's go on to the next one. This was another out of conference matchup for this SEC team, and the SEC did not fare well once again. Just like first Vandy losing to UNLV and now BYU beating Arkansas. I mean, golly, what has happened to this conference in the last couple of years? Arkansas last year, like a year ago to this matchup, won this one 52-35. And once again, we were able to get offenses in this one, but Arkansas's defense is definitely going to be concerning going down to the stretch, especially when they have to face LSU's offense this weekend, and then Ole Miss, and then Texas A&M. The list goes on and on. So Arkansas's defense, they did lose their top two linebackers of last year with Sanders and Bumper Pool, but their offense continues to be really good. But you can have really good offense if your defense is poor. I mean, BYU was able to have their way against Arkansas. It looked like an Arkansas runaway, but you got to give credit to BYU. It's a tough environment and a tough road trip to go all the way to Provo, to Fayetteville, Arkansas. So you got to give credit to BYU. But what are your expectations now for Arkansas? I feel like every year we get in the preseason, like, okay, this could be a team that could be a dark horse, and now they lay an egg against BYU.
I think Arkansas is definitely a step behind LSU and Ole Miss, probably even Alabama and Texas A&M. But, again, this is an out-of-conference loss. A&M has one. LSU has one. Florida has one. That's a team that we're a little higher on now. So still everything to play for in the SEC technically, but they got to get it right fast, and they need number 5 to get back in the lineup. I mean, this team, they like to run the football. KJ Jefferson likes to run the football. I think that they did a good job putting up 31 points here against BYU, but for this offense to take it to the next level, they need Raheem Sanders back in the lineup. And defensively, they got to tie up some loose ends, because letting up 40 points out of conference, that's just not a good gauge for how this team's going to do in SEC play. I mean, take a talented offense like LSU or Ole Miss, and they're just going to have a field day against the Hogs.
Yeah, we will see if the Hogs can bounce back. Like I said, won't get any easier. A road test Saturday night in Death Valley. That's not all easy to walk into an environment like that. So let's go on to the next game and the final game here of week number 3. We won't spend too much time on this one, and this was Kentucky still handling their business. Kentucky still remaining undefeated 3-0. They'll start conference play this weekend, and they were able to beat Kentucky. Not able to beat Kentucky, able to beat Akron 35-3. Devin Leary and the offense continue to look good. 35 points against Akron. I'm not really going to go into it. This is a team that you're supposed to beat pretty handily. And then Ray Davis had an insane game. I had a long reception touchdown, which I was looking, boy, if we had that bonus, he would have had like 20 plus points in this game, because he had a rushing touchdown, also had a receiving touchdown too. So Kentucky, Big Blue Nation, I don't know if you're going to get on this Big Blue Nation, but you better get on it before they start conference play. So I think that they're going to be a dark horse, especially, with Vanderbilt falling off of a cliff, and Missouri looking good, and Florida looking good, Tennessee with some questions. So we'll definitely be looking at Kentucky's matchup in the next coming weeks. All right, let's get into how the crew did in week 3 pick'ems. And Wade not only won in SC Fantasy, he also won in picks with his
Vanderbilt game, man.
UNLV Vandy game. That's what ultimately came down to it. 8-3. I went 7-4 because I picked Vandy to win, and they ultimately let me down. Chet went with a couple of upsets. South Carolina had it in the first half, but Georgia ended up winning that. And he had also a couple of other games. He picked Vandy too, which was also, a letdown. I'm just going to say the loser of the SEC this week is Vandy. I'm just going to keep on piling them on. It's just sickening that they lost that game. But we'll give you the credit for the UNLV pick. So you get the dub in week number 3 for picks. So we'll see if you continue to roll that one on as we get more conference games in SEC week 4. And our SEC week 4 is presented by Fanatics. With the season rolling on, if you want to upgrade your gear, heading on over to Fanatics, you can use our link that is scrolling around the screen for a couple of moments. And now let's get into our SEC Week 4 slate and preview, starting off with an SEC West battle between Auburn at Texas A&M. Auburn, like I mentioned, is 3-0 coming into this matchup. Wins against UMass, Cal, and also Samford. Texas A&M 2-1 on the season with their one loss coming in week number 2 against Miami. Texas A&M, I think that we're both high on Connor Weigman and the way that this offense is looking. Jimbo Fisher was actually smart and decided to hire an offensive coordinator. That's what everybody's been saying the past couple of years. Look at that. It worked. You're scoring like over 40 points a game. Who would have knew? So Hugh Freeze returns to SEC action here. He's had success against Texas A&M as the Ole Miss coach. Can he continue that against Texas A&M on the road?
This one's a toss-up to me. I mean, like you said earlier, nobody's really talked about Auburn. They're undefeated. They haven't really played anybody yet, but they have had a road test against Cal, so I don't think the road environment scares me away too much. But I just don't trust the offense enough. I think Connor Weigman has gotten things going for Texas A&M. I just think there's a little bit more talent overall here with A&M, but I wouldn't be surprised to see Auburn hang in this one.
Yeah, and before we get the pick, I got one comment rolling in. Hope the Tigers can send those pigs all the way home. And yes, we will get into that LSU-Arkansas matchup later in the show. Auburn and Texas A&M, yeah, this is a coin flip for me. I'm going to go with Texas A&M, though. The way that this offense has been playing is just looking really good. I think that this could definitely be a high-scoring shootout. The way, if Texas A&M offense, their defense doesn't really improve in this matchup, I think that Peyton Thorne, he's an experienced quarterback that can really light up your defense. But I think that Auburn's going to try and salvage their running game. But if they can't, I just think that this is going to be a hard matchup to watch. So I'm going to go with Texas A&M in front of this home environment. If it was in Auburn, I probably would have went with Auburn. So I think that Texas A&M protects the home field. This is going to be a close one. I think this is like a 34-28 type of game. But I think that Connor Weigman, the way that this offense has been looking, I think that the Aggies pull off a big win and get to that 3-win mark. And I think with the win, they get back into the top 25 going into week number 5. And Chet is also going to go gig 'em. So we're sweeping here with Texas A&M. We will see if Auburn can make us look like complete fools for picking Texas A&M. But we are rolling with the Aggies to pull off this one in SEC play to begin the week 4 slate. All right, let's get into game number 2 here. Another SEC game here at 11 a.m. So all the SEC East and SEC West fans, you better grab your coffee because it's going to be an early one for you. All right, let's talk about the teams that we've been talking about a little bit the most here in the show. It's Kentucky going on the road to Vanderbilt. Kentucky 3-0. They haven't really been tested yet, but I don't think they're going to be tested here against a Vanderbilt team that's coming off back-to-back losses against Wake Forest in UNLV. So are you going to ride with Big Blue in this one?
Yeah, I think it's hard not to at this point. I know it's a road game, and Kentucky's played pretty much nobody. Definitely the easiest schedule to date in the SEC. But I think that they do just fine. Vanderbilt hasn't shown us any reason to think they could hang in this one.
Yeah, I've given Vanderbilt too many chances. Put UK on there. I'm going to go with Big Blue Nation. I don't think it's going to be even close. Ray Davis is going to run all over this Vanderbilt defense. This Vanderbilt defense has shown it all season that they can't really stop anybody. Wake Forest is able to score at will. UNLV was able to score at will. So I think with Devin Leary, I think that he's going to have his best game of the season by far. I think that 14+ in the books here for Kentucky. I think they come out with a statement and show that they can definitely be a dark horse. And, yep, I'm not surprised. All rolling with the blue in this one against Vanderbilt. We'll see if Vanderbilt can pull off an upset here in Asheville, but we'll see. But let's go on to the next one. And, yes, this is our SEC talk. Game of the week, 2:30 on CBS, baby. I know, Neil, I won't stand for the Vandy hate, but I'm going to unleash it. They lost to UNLV, which is ultimately embarrassing. It's as embarrassing as Alabama only putting up 17 points against South Florida. But we had number 15, Ole Miss, at number 13, Alabama. I think that this is a lot of hype in this one. I looked at Vegas books, and yes, Alabama is the favorite, 6.5. If you're a betting man or woman, go bet that as you will. I'm probably not going to touch this one. This game scares me. But Ole Miss, I think that you really hyped them up. You picked them at some point to win the SEC West. I don't know if you are still picking them to win the SEC West at this point or not, but
I
Ole
picked
Miss.
them after the LSU loss to Florida State.
Okay. All right. But Ole Miss still undefeated. I think that they have one of the best wins here in the country with beating Tulane. They also coming off of a big win against Georgia Tech. Meanwhile, Alabama coming off of an embarrassing showing. I haven't seen that embarrassing showing probably since they lost to ULM in Saban's first year against Alabama. So we'll see who's at quarterback. Will it be Milroe? Will it be Buckner? Will it be Simpson? Who knows? We probably won't know until the game. Both teams are on the field for the first play. But I feel like Lane Kiffin, this offense is going to be out for blood, especially against an Alabama defense. So who do you have in this one? You have the Rebels. I'm not even going to call this an upset. I mean, if Ole Miss wins, not really going to be upsetting to anybody. But do you have Ole Miss pulling off the road win, or do you have Alabama pulling off a win and really silencing all the haters and doubters about them?
Oh, gosh. There's just so much at play here. I mean, I feel like we don't know anything about this Alabama team, but you kind of feel like that, hey, maybe it's lightning in a bottle and they'll put it together eventually because the talent's there, but maybe it's just not. I mean, maybe they just don't have it this year. I wasn't even really that high on Ole Miss coming into the year. I thought last year was their chance, but with the makeup of the SEC, I mean, everything's kind of falling into their lap this year. This is an Ole Miss team that has given the best of Alabama teams trouble, Look at like Bo Wallace beating Alabama and Chad Kelly beating Alabama. So it kind of feels like Ole Miss has their number, not so much in recent years. All right, I just got to go for it. I am picking Ole Miss. And as far as that 6.5 goes, I mean, I just think that that's a lot of points. I think this will be a close game. Or Ole Miss might win it by like 14.
Yeah, we had to go Rebels just there. So we'll see if Ole Miss fans will travel. There'll definitely be some. It's not too far of a road trip from Oxford. So I'm going to go ahead and reveal my pick now, but I want to let you reveal Chet's pick. And this was one of the reasons why I picked Alabama. As you can see, Chet also went with Ole Miss. So I will never, ever have three logos go against Alabama. I'm not doing it on the show. I mean, this is going to be an insane game, though. I'm going to go with Alabama. Don't even ask me why. I just think that this team has to find some motivation. They need to find a leader before this game because if they don't come with any fire, Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin will, because Lane Kiffin wants to beat the crap out of Nick Saban eventually. He hasn't been able to do so with this high-powered offense. Just imagine if Ole Miss comes out of the gate and they're like up like 14-0. Alabama is already.
They don't have the offense to.
Yeah, they don't have the offense. So if Ole Miss honestly wants to win this one, you got to just keep on scoring, and just hope that your defense is able to stop them. So I think that's really the key here for Ole Miss. Keep on scoring, because if this gets to a shootout, that goes into your favor. If this is a defensive battle, that plays into Alabama's favor. So I don't really have a say in this one. I'm just going to go with Alabama just to avoid all three logos on our screen being Ole Miss. So I'm
going with the voodoo.
Yes, I'm just saving us from looking like complete fools here on live show. So Chet's going to go with Ole Miss. This is like the most that I've seen him pick in-state schools.
I think he's homesick. He's loving the home state.
He must be. But 2 Rebels, 1 tied. So this is going to be the game that we look at. If Alabama wins, I get the advantage. If Ole Miss wins, y'all two get the advantage in the pick'em standing. So this is going to be a very good game. The winner of this will definitely really get, not really be the class of the SEC West, but get a leg up in the race. So let's go on to the next one. This is going to be an exciting game that we're looking forward to. Is UTSA at number 23, Tennessee. UTSA is a sneaky, really good group of 5 team this week, coming off a really good season last year. Have a really experienced quarterback, a really experienced defense. So this is not really an opponent that you want walking to your stadium after that you lose in the swamp. So Tennessee, this is a big bounce back, but watch out here for UTSA. So are you going to go with the Vols? You're going to go with the Meeps?
The Roadrunners, yeah, they're a tough team. Tennessee is vulnerable coming off the loss, but I'm going to stick with the Vols here. I watched Texas San Antonio play on Friday night. They played against Army, and Army is a team that LSU has to play in a few weeks, and they've kind of ditched the option. They were spreading it around, throwing the ball, and it was giving UTSA a lot of trouble. So ultimately the Roadrunners did lose that game at home, and I think that kind of discounts them a little bit, in my opinion. And Tennessee, I think that they just straighten it out and win a game here. It might not be a blowout or anything, but I think they get in the win column.
I tell you what, Army was really slinging that ball. I mean, shoot, if they keep doing that, they are definitely going to be a really good team there. They're going to be in a future American team. The way that the reports are rolling out on Army, moving away from an independent, going into the American, we'll see that comes to fruition. But I agree with you. I think that Tennessee is due for a bounce back in this one. I think that they get it done. UTSA, against Army, they didn't look good. And against Houston, they didn't really look good. So I definitely think that they'll have talent to keep this close for a half. But I think that with Tennessee and Joe Milton, the way that he just looked, I think he's really going to be determined to have a bounce back game. And the way that this Tennessee program, they're going to be locked in and focused. They're not really going to overlook a team like UTSA. So I think that Rocky Top gets back on top here in week number 4. And Chet is also going to go with Big Orange, all rolling with Tennessee against the Roadrunners to take this one. Let's go on to the next one. This is another out-of-conference game. Florida coming off of a huge win at home in the Swamp. They're now a top 25 team, and they face off against the Charlotte team that's really been disappointing the past couple of years. So do you have the Gators rolling on?
Yeah, I think Florida has really changed my perspective on this team. Of course, I would have picked them to beat the Charlotte 49ers either way, but I think Florida can breathe now after the big rivalry win, and they can just relax and shouldn't really be on upset alert here. Charlotte's not that good of a team.
Yeah, I agree with you. This is a quick pick for me. I'm going to go with the Gators to continue their winning ways, and Chet is also going to go with Florida. So back-to-back clean sweeps of SEC East opponents. We will see that continue with our SEC West showdown, the battle for the Golden Boot, baby. Arkansas at number 12, LSU. Last year, this was probably, this was just an ugly game last year. LSU ended up winning this game 13-10. Go back to last year, KJ Jefferson didn't play in this one, so I know that KJ Jefferson is going to be looking for a little bit of momentum and motivation in this one since he missed this game last year. But Arkansas, this is a game that they really need coming off of a loss against BYU. But LSU, if they're just looking to continue that momentum rolling after a dominating performance in Starkville. So do you have the Tigers pulling this one off, or do you have Wu Pig Sui pulling off the upset?
Well, I do think that this past weekend played a big part into my pick. LSU looked as good as they could. Arkansas looked a little lost. I think there's a chance we'll see Raheem Sanders suit up for the Razorbacks, but this is a tough debut for him. I like the Tigers at night under the lights against Arkansas here. Arkansas has given LSU some tough games the last couple meetings. They did beat LSU in Death Valley 2 years ago, so LSU fans need to be on alert, but I wouldn't say that it's, they need to be on watch, but not upset alert.
Yeah, I'm going to go with LSU. This Arkansas defense can't really have any answers for Jaden Daniels in this passing attack. It could definitely be a long night for them. I think on the opposite side, we saw LSU's secondary. They're really not really tested against Mississippi State. Mississippi State wasn't able to get many passes off because they were able to get pressure. So I think that's definitely going to be the key. Raheem Sanders is back for this one. If they're able to run the football, I think that Arkansas is going to stay in this one. But they're really bogged down. They have to pass the ball. This is not really a team that's really suitable to just be a one-dimensional offense. So I wouldn't surprise me, if Arkansas keeps this one close. It's a rivalry game. It's a trophy game. Arkansas and LSU, it's always a battle to the end. But I am going to go with LSU under the lights Saturday night in Death Valley. I think that they continue that and keep the trophy in the state of Louisiana for yet another year. And Chet is also going to go with the Fighting Tigers of LSU to pull off the win over the Hogs on Saturday night. All right, let's go on to the next 3 slate of games. We're going to go back to another non-conference versus SEC matchup. Number 1, Georgia faces off against UAB. So do you have the Dogs continuing on embarking for a win here against the Blazers?
Yeah, I think this one's pretty easy. Georgia did get tested against South Carolina. I think that kind of served as a wake-up call, and I think this team will only continue to get better.
Yeah, Georgia, this is not going to be very pretty. I think that UAB, they're definitely a solid program. Trent Dilfer has been playing really well the first couple of weeks, but they're just going to be overmatched. Georgia's going to win this one pretty handily. And we're all going to roll with the dogs. And this one, not really surprising. Georgia's probably not going to get tested this whole entire season. Maybe they have a hiccup, but it's just looking like another 12-0 season for the Georgia Dogs. All right, let's go on to the next one, another SEC East. And here we go. We talk about the letdown. Can it happen here? Memphis coming off of a showing against Navy. Navy was able to hang around with Memphis. Memphis did end up beating them in the Liberty Bowl, but Missouri is definitely going to be a team to talk about. If they keep continuing on these wins, this could definitely be a top 25 team before you know it. They're probably not going to get it here against a Memphis team that's unranked. So Memphis at Missouri, going to go with the Tigers or go with the Tigers?
Tigers are Tigers. You can't lose. Yeah, you talked about the letdown environment. We've seen this Memphis team be very pesky for Ole Miss and Mississippi State. Those two programs said, sorry, take this show north and down the road to Missouri. And I think it gets interesting. I just think that Missouri feels on top of the world. They got the big win against Kansas State. I probably would have picked them to beat Memphis had they won, but I don't see Missouri getting the clean sweep and out of conference play. I'm going to go with Memphis in this one. I think they play with the chip on their shoulder. Got some guys that are from the SEC states that maybe had a chance to play at that level. And yeah, I think they win a close one. Maybe another wacky special teams play. We saw the 61-yard field goal. Maybe we'll see something go in Memphis's favor.
Well, I got Missouri continuing on their win because Memphis's defense hasn't really impressed me as of late. Navy was able to have their way, and that's a offense that just wants to run the football. So if Missouri would just put Cody Schrader and say, here you go off for $150, and they're going to win the football game. So I was very impressed, though, with Brady Cook. I think that if you continue to play like that, Missouri is definitely going to be a tough out in the SEC East. So I don't see a letdown here. Maybe it happens for a quarter, but after that, Missouri pulls away for a victory in Como. So I'm going to go with MIZZOU to win this one. And Chet is also going to go Missouri. So this is a UNLV Vandy part 2. We'll see if you get any lucky. So we'll see.
Luther Burden's still going to catch 130 yards, though. No worries. It's going to be a high-scoring game.
It definitely will. It has to be a high-scoring game. Memphis wants to win this one. So we'll see who wins this one, the Battle of the Tigers. All right, one more matchup before we close the book here on the Week 4 slate. Mississippi State at South Carolina. And we haven't seen this matchup in quite some time, especially Mississippi State traveling to Columbia. But these are two teams that just need a win at some point. South Carolina's 1-2. Mississippi State coming off of an embarrassing performance at home against LSU. So who you got between the Gamecocks and the Bulldogs? Who needs it more?
Yeah, definitely a who needs it more type game coming off of tough losses this past weekend. I think South Carolina is the more complete team, but I do think Mississippi State, could give them some troubles should Mississippi State figure out the passing offense, but I just don't know that they do. I'm going to go with the home team in this one. Should it be in Stark Vegas, I might flip the other way, but South Carolina showed me a little bit more this past weekend, and if I think they can figure out their own running game, I think this team can kind of start to put it together.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that's probably for sure. There's not going to be many touchdowns scored in this one. I think this is going to be a defensive battle. Mississippi State's offense, I think they're definitely going to go to their bread and butter this week of going run the football. But if they can't run the football successfully, they're going to lose every week because, Will Rogers just doesn't really look like the quarterback that we saw the past couple of years. It's definitely the change of guards in the offense. Not his fault. Definitely the circumstances that was going on is definitely tragic. But South Carolina, they definitely showed some spite, but they got to play. They got the way that they played in the first half against Georgia. They got to play that for 4 quarters. I mean, you can't just do that. They did the same thing against North Carolina in week number 1. They can't do that in the past coming week. So South Carolina falls to 1-3. They're probably going to be the biggest disappointment in the SEC so far. I don't see that happening. Like you mentioned, this was in Starkville. I probably went with Mississippi State, but this is definitely a tough road environment. I think that South Carolina fans will show up for this one. So give me the Gamecocks in this one. It won't be pretty. I think it's going to be like a 21-17 type of game. There's not going to be very much offense in this one. I think that both defenses will come to play. But give me the Gamecocks. Is it going to be a clean sweep? And it is.
Oh, boy.
And Good luck, Gamecocks. So we'll see if you can pull it off for us. But a clean sweep, once again, for South Carolina. And that closes the book for week number 4. It's an insane week inside the conference and outside the conference. We're definitely going to know, who takes their lead in the SEC East and SEC West. So we'll definitely keep our eye out this Saturday throughout the week 4 slate. All right, let's get into some hot topics. I feel like we asked this one last week, but after their poor performance against South Florida, who should be the answer at quarterback for Alabama?
Well, if they don't believe in Milroe, I think they got to turn to the freshman Ty Simpson, because Tyler Buchner, he just doesn't have it. If you can't go into South Florida and dominate, you're not going to play well against Ole Miss. So I think if you want to throw Ole Miss for a loop, you start the freshman. Maybe they don't have enough film on him. Ultimately, I think Alabama made this move too soon. I think Milroe showed enough that he could compete, and now you're giving Ole Miss more time to prepare for multiple quarterbacks. They have film against Buchner. They probably know they don't have to respect him. So the answer to me should be Milroe, but at this point, if you want to win on Saturday, I think you throw the freshman out there, Simpson. Who do you think?
I'm going with Milroe. I mean, he definitely, if you watch the first 2 games, I mean, at least Alabama was moving the ball consistently. They weren't able to move the ball at all against, South Florida with Tyler Buchner and Ty Simpson. I just think you need a dual threat guy. Ole Miss defense usually struggles against a dual threat quarterback. So I think that best chance for Alabama to just move the football and you just get your bearings against Ole Miss this week. You got to go with Milroe. Next one, Missouri, fine with 100K. Definitely got to like this rule under the new SEC policy after fans rush the field. I just want to get your thoughts. Do you like fans rushing the field? We saw Colorado rush the field against Colorado State after they were 24.5-point favorites. So give me your thoughts on that. And also, do you like the SEC policy of fining fans for having fun?
I think it's unique to college football. I think that the kid makes the 61-yard field goal and the fans storm the field. I think that's completely fine. Now, the Colorado game, I get it. It was a high-stakes game, similar circumstances, an overtime win. I understand. I think that's a little bit more embarrassing because you kind of got to act like you've been there, but Colorado really hasn't, so their fans are taking what they can get. So I really don't have a problem with it. I understand why the SEC doesn't want people on the field. I mean, you watch the Missouri game, you got players getting jumped on, and it just opens a whole host of issues. But I think it's just part of college football. I wish ultimately the SEC would kind of relax on it. Now, I wouldn't have guessed in a million years that Missouri would be the first team to get the increased fine. I don't think you would have either. But it's just how college football rolls, man. It's unpredictable.
Well, I bet Missouri fans were having a heart attack at them because they saw a flag come up, but it was just a yellow pom-pom.
I think it was a
that was on the field. So that was definitely questioning of that. But, yeah, definitely congratulations for them. Rush the field. I don't care. If you beat a top 15 team, go for it. Colorado, on the other hand, maybe not, especially if you're a 24.5-point favorite. But Missouri wasn't even favored in this one. It was a top 15 matchup. So I definitely agree that Missouri fans do whatever you want. Your college kids, you won't have many opportunities to do this. So take advantage of it.
What if the pom-pom would have hit the football?
Yeah. All right. Chet chimes in for the first time. Maybe Florida can flip the switch and compete with Georgia. Thank you for asking that question, because that was the question I had next. Says, who can be that team to compete with Georgia in the SEC East?
I think Chet's on it. I think it right now is Florida. They seem to have the physicality on defense to hang with Georgia. I don't think Georgia's going to be as elite offensively. I don't know if Florida has the offense. I think that's still the big question. Offensively, I think it's Tennessee. But complete team, I'm going to go with Florida right now just because they beat Tennessee.
I think that Florida and Tennessee are about the only 2 teams that can match up with them. I think that will give the edge to Florida just based on their defensive. I think that Tennessee definitely has the advantage because Georgia does have to go to Neyland Stadium. But I feel like Georgia just absolutely has dominated that series in the past. Last year, Tennessee, they were getting all the hype. They were number 1. And then Georgia, I know this is a different team, Georgia team, but still, I think that Florida is going to be the main test. But I still think that Georgia is going to win the East in the end. So the last one is after a poor performance by Mississippi State's offense, should we be concerned with them moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think that honestly, I thought Will Rogers was not a system QB. I thought that he was a fine NFL prospect. I thought the arm talent would play in any system, but he just seems a little bit lost. I think the play calls are maybe a little too, I don't know, elaborate for what they need to try to do. I think they need to kind of simplify it and get back to running the football, which is not something I thought we would say about this team.
And Chet chimes in. Once again, he's calling it that LSU wins the SEC. I don't think that anyone listening to the show is surprised that he's picking LSU to win. And then Chaos Creator, I didn't really see any upsets from you this week. So, I mean, you got to have at least one upset a week. I mean, I'm not counting Ole Miss against Alabama.
Ole Miss.
Alabama's a 6.5-point favorite, but it's a top 15 versus 13 here. We're kind of cutting corners with that. So, no upsets this week. No chaos happening as of yet. But we have some other ones. Ole Miss might be the team that can compete with Georgia. We'll see. I think that if they beat, I think the next 2 weeks, they have not only Alabama, but they also have LSU at home. So we're definitely, if they go 2-0, Ole Miss, you can just pencil in an SEC West champion that one. So we'll definitely see. He says that Mississippi State definitely has to find it out. And then Ole Miss almost had South Carolina last week. Almost is only counts in hand, whatever you call the saying. But yeah, Chet, next time, whenever you have South Carolina's up 14-3, don't post it on Twitter because all the Georgia fans are just going to come after you. So don't ever do that again. So that is it for SEC Talk week number 4. This is definitely going to be an exciting time. SEC play is getting rocking and rolling here as we continue on. So thank you for everyone tuning in, for all the comments, likes, and views here on the show. Don't forget to like and subscribe on Sports Scramble Podcast. So we will be back here next week recapping week number 4. There's definitely going to be a big week outside the conference, inside the conference. And we will also look forward to week number 5 when we should get into the meat and potatoes here in conference play. So hope everyone enjoys the rest of your week, and we will see you back here same time, same place here on SEC Talk.